Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So in this one here, I wanted to talk about the big announcement yesterday, obviously, that the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 4 is going to be the last season, but I want to talk about more of what the cast has been saying, because there was actually an interview today with Entertainment Weekly, and they talked about the ending. There was actually a reference to something here in an article from Screen Rant, so I do actually want to get into some other details here, because they talk about the ending of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. And Gimple was also asked about, how an Avengers style, I guess, reunion could eventually happen. And so I do want to get into their answers here. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. Now, obviously, the news yesterday was very shocking. I think that for a lot of us, it was like, wait, what? Really? This is going to be the final season? Because I personally always thought that this show would probably go like 6 seasons. And again, it's one of those things where I think with The Walking Dead, there needs to be an overall direction, right? And I think that, a lot of people would have been fine to watch like 5 or 6 seasons or whatever of the shows, but it was more that like we didn't know how long things were going to be going. And I think everyone really likes to have an overall direction of like, okay, this is going to be the end. It's going to be going on for this long. And then, there could be something else after this and that, right? And so now that we actually have that and that the 4th season is going to be the end, it's like, okay, so now we know that we're building to a moment that could eventually, like afterwards, actually have all the characters reunite. And so there's this excitement overall now, like, talking about the show, at least for myself personally, I do feel like everything with the story really does like matter now, because we're actually building to something here. And so I want to get into exactly what I saw here in an article from Screen Rant, because it's really interesting here. So apparently this was actually said during the panel yesterday. I never actually watched the entire panel. I was just getting a lot of updates online, but I never watched the entire panel yet. But apparently this was said here, which I also heard in an interview from Entertainment Weekly as well. It happened today, actually. But what was said here was, it was always the plan to have this arc. It ends in a very specific way. David has done such a good job outlining where these characters go. So I guess it was Norman Reedus who said that. And I think that, him saying that, he also said something very similar in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, but it was always the plan to have this arc, and it ends in a very specific way. What Norman Reedus also says in the interview with Entertainment Weekly is, I think people are going to be very shocked by the ending because it ends in a very satisfying way. I do think that the arc that they have planned right now for season 3 and 4, I really think what it's going to be about, based off what they've been saying a lot during Comic-Con, is like, what's the point of, us surviving? Like, are we surviving? Like, are we living our lives, sort of thing, right? And I think that, we see that a little bit in the trailer, right? Like, Carol talks about that. And I think that that's going to be something that by the end of the 4th season, there will be sort of an answer to that they're going to actually, I guess, reach a conclusion to that, where it's like, this is going to be how our lives are going to be now, kind of thing. And I think they will sort of like decide on something with that. I think that this whole, like European story where you have them in France and Spain, I think that eventually it's going to come to an end where the characters do come back to America, but there's going to be something that they have really learned about, I guess, how to survive and what their life is going to be like. Because I do think that that's sort of the point of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon overall, is really like the characters, I guess, getting to that point in their lives and that point in the apocalypse. And so I think that that's what they're working on for the characters specifically. And, it is really interesting to have Norman Reedus say that the story's not going to end in the way that people think, because he does actually mention like it's the 4th and final season. And so, people might think it's going to end in a certain way, but, I think people are going to be kind of surprised by it. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm wondering what that means, because, he's saying like, because it's the 4th and final season, people might be thinking like it's going to end in a way where it's like, this is the end kind of thing, right? But it's going to end in a very satisfying and like surprising way. And to me, the only thing that makes a lot of sense is that like they're going to get back home, and there's going to be some sort of setup, I feel like, for whatever happens next. And I think that makes a lot of sense, but I do also think there will be an ending too. Like, I do think that you have to have an ending to like the point of the spinoff. You can't just have like all of these stories going on for whatever, right? Like, you have to have a conclusion to this, which I think the conclusion is going to be like they make it back to America and they're finally home. Like, I think that is something that, makes a lot of sense for the characters, because like obviously you want the characters to be back there, right? And so how does that happen and all of that? Like I think that is something that will be really exciting to see. And I think it will be satisfying in that way, but it's just, yeah, the surprising part, like what happens after that? Like where do they go? You never know. Like what if the ending is literally like, we're just going to go and live here and there now. Like we're just going to travel everywhere and we're not going to necessarily go back home because we're here now. And that's the ending to Daryl and Carol's story. And like, that's it for the characters. You know what I mean? Like that could just be the ending. Like imagine we don't see Daryl and Carol after this. Like to me, the only thing about that is the way Gimple talked about all of this, the way the showrunner and even like the actors are talking about what happens for Daryl and Carol after this. Like it doesn't seem like this is the end. Like they're very open about like Daryl and Carol doing other stories, and there was a lot of talk about other things. And so I do actually want to get into something here that I found really, really interesting, and that is what Scott Gimple was saying about, you know, an Avengers, I guess, style reunion for all of the characters. And what he was saying was that like you have to think of it more like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not so much like the Avengers. Like he said, he loves Marvel and stuff, but it's not going to be something like that. It's more going to be like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And I think that that is definitely, and also he wasn't like confirming anything like it's going to be happening. He was just saying like, try to not think of it like that. Like if the characters do reunite, it's not going to be like the Avengers. It's going to be more like, you know, something like that, which I think is also really cool. You know, like I think that makes a lot of sense. Like the characters reuniting, like obviously people refer to the Avengers in that sense because that was a big moment that happened, and having all the characters, you know, come together. And so everyone references that a lot. But with The Walking Dead, like you got to do it in a way that makes sense for the show and for that story. And I wouldn't want something like that because I think it would be kind of silly. You do need to make it more grounded and more just like in the reality of what, you know, the world is and what these characters' stories are. And so I think something like that, yeah, that would be really cool. And I think it makes a lot of sense. So the way they're talking about the future and stuff, and also the question was asked, like, are we going to see Daryl and Carol again? Like, you know, obviously reuniting with other characters, this and that afterwards. And there wasn't like this sort of feeling of like, no, this is the end. And Melissa McBride and Norman Reedus were just kind of like quiet, and they just looked at Scott Gimple and they just didn't really want to say anything. And Gimple kind of laughed and was just like, you know, didn't want to say anything about really anything. And so I do think what is happening overall is I do think there is actually a plan for something afterwards, and they just want to focus on the story right now. Like they just want to focus on season 3 and 4 and telling these last seasons here of the show, and then we'll see what happens after that. I will say there will have to be an announcement at some point. Like I was thinking about it, like in terms of all the characters reuniting and everything like that, like how do you do something like that when, you know, you have two shows that are going on? And I think the only way to do it is you have to announce it when one of the shows ends. Like, I think once, you know, like whatever one ends first, you have to announce it at that point. Because I think if that's just the end, and then you're going to wait until the next show ends, like there's not a lot of excitement there. And so I think that one of the shows is going to have that sort of, you know, I guess not necessarily, or not surprising, but I guess suspenseful element to it where it's like, are these characters going to survive or what's happening? Like, this is the end. You know what I mean? Like, I think that whatever show is ending first, you know, there will be all that excitement of just like, well, what's going to happen afterwards? How does this all end? And I think based off of that ending, we'll see what happens after that. I think they should announce everything then. And then if Dead City is going to be the last show that airs after that, which I feel like at this point makes a lot of sense because I do think that season 3, you know, it could be out after The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 4, but I don't think so. I do think that Dead City season 3 is going to be out next year. And then The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 4 will be out likely next fall. And then I really do think that Dead City will get a season 4, but it will be the end. I mean, maybe season 3 is the end, but again, they never announced that being the end. And so I don't think it's going to be. I think the way that they're working out the story here, they're likely going to have both shows have 4 seasons. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, and you'll have all the characters in a really awesome place to set up something else. And I think it really makes The Walking Dead, you know, very successful in that sense, or at least look very successful, right? In terms of like these spinoffs getting 4 seasons each, telling these stories, and it's just overall like it works really well. So I do think that there is like something that is, you know, in the works right now for all the characters reuniting. I think that it's actually happening a lot sooner than, a lot sooner than I think we all thought. I really do think what happened is, you know, like that's the thing about where The Walking Dead is right now. Like, you know, the showrunner was actually talking, like David Zabel, he was talking about you know, where things were going and all that. And, you know, after they were sort of, he mentions that like the Spain storyline was always going to be like 2 seasons kind of thing. I do think that, you know, as much as like they are saying that like this show was always going to be 4 seasons kind of thing, I really do feel like they probably were going to go for a little bit longer if possible, like maybe like 6 seasons. That's sort of overall what I think was going to happen. You know, obviously that's just sort of my opinion, but I do feel like if the ratings were super high or if there was a lot of excitement, you know, they obviously would keep going, because obviously if everything is very, very successful, like why end it, right? And so I think that it got to the point over the last year where I do think AMC was like, all right, there's not a lot of excitement going on and we need to do something. And so I think that's why they were like, you know what, 4 seasons, you know, I feel like for both shows, I mean, we'll see about Dead City season 4, but I do think they'll get that. I think that it was just like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, you know, 4 seasons for both shows, and then we'll do something else afterwards, because like by the time the 4th seasons of these shows come out, like it's gonna be what, 2026, 2027, around there. So like the reunion story is going to be 2028, or like maybe at the end of 2027, right? Like if they want to, you know, sort of time it for then. So the way I see it overall, like say it happens 2027 or maybe 2028, like The Ones Who Live was 2024, and like, you know, Rick, yeah, he reunited with his family, but like that was also a storyline we were all talking about since 2018, right? When Rick left the show. And so really it's been since 2018, since Rick left the show, that all the characters were all together. So I think that 2028 is the year for me anyways that I'm looking at, and I'm like, I think it makes a lot of sense for the reunion story to actually happen, you know, in that year, because it'll be 10 years from when Rick left the show. And, you know, it's a really long time to wait, I think, for the characters to all reunite, but I think it makes a lot of sense too. You know, at that point, it'll have been 4 years since The Ones Who Live aired, 4.5 years maybe. And I think that, yeah, like that was always going to be sort of, you know, the next time Rick and Michonne were going to show up back in the show or the world, right? So that to me makes a lot of sense. Like, I just think that for Andrew Lincoln and Denai Guerrera, you know, they want to come back and play these roles, but it's like, well, they have these other spinoffs going. And that's the one thing we've always talked about, right? Was like, obviously Rick and Michonne are likely going to return, but it's going to be for a story that really matters with everyone. And I think it was always going to be like, whenever these spinoffs end, that's when it's going to happen. And so now we know when it's going to be ending. And based off of the comments made today, I think that, yeah, there's a lot of excitement now because we do have an actual direction. So overall, yeah, really amazing news. And definitely the interviews today were really exciting. I do actually want to get into something later on in a different video, though, because this is going to take quite a bit to talk about. But we actually do have some news regarding something related to, you know, a lot of what we were talking about before with, you know, things changing with The Walking Dead and everything. And so, yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and I do think that there is something big planned for after these spinoffs end, and yeah, it's happening very soon, which is kind of insane. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.